A pact did not break in one dramatic night. It cracked by degrees, each compromise dressed as tradition, each silence sold as peace, until cruelty could wear ceremony and still be called law. Theodora had learned that lesson early in the way elders looked through her, in the way men lowered their voices when her family name entered a room, in the way women touched her arm in private but never stood beside her in public. Hope survived anyway, stubborn as a root under winter stone. She had carried it to the altar believing vows might be stronger than fear. She discovered, under the full moon and two watching packs, that fear had rehearsed this scene for months. The sacred clearing blazed with torchlight and polished silver bowls. Pine smoke rolled low over the circle, clinging to skin and cloth. Theodora stood in white wool trimmed with moon thread, braid coiled at the nape of her neck, wrists painted with blessing oil that smelled faintly of rosemary and ash. She had cut her palm for the joining rite as custom required, a shallow line with a clean blade, and held her hand over the stone basin while Griffin Ironhold stepped forward to do the same. He did not. He stopped an arm's length away and inhaled sharply, as if she had struck him. Then he took one deliberate step back, making certain everyone could see it. "I smell corruption," he said, loud enough for both packs at the edge of the torches. "Prophecy blood. She carries it." The words moved through the clearing like sparks jumping dry grass. The Ironhold contingent began murmuring at once, not surprised, only eager. Theodora felt her heartbeat slam against her throat. Griffin's face held practiced revulsion, not confusion. That was the first clean cut of truth. This was not a man startled by ritual scent. This was a man delivering a line. "Griffin," she said, because names sometimes brought people back to themselves. "Look at me." He did, briefly. She saw no conflict there, only calculation. Elder Varick, who had blessed her mother's grave 2 winters before, raised his staff. "The rite is halted. Theodora Valewood is unfit for Luna Station until purity can be established." "Purity," someone repeated from the back, and another voice answered, "Unclean." A third, sharper voice from the Iron Creed line called out, "Valewood women break alphas. Ask the old songs." Theodora turned toward her own pack's front row, searching faces she had known since childhood. Her aunt stared at the ground. Her cousin folded her hands inside her sleeves. The beta who had taught Theodora to track never met her eyes. No one spoke for her. Not one. Inside her, thought narrowed to a hard, bright thread. This is theater. They staged this. They waited for blood scent because blood makes fear easy. If I kneel now, they own the story. If I shout, they call me hysterical. If I run, they call me guilty. She stayed standing. "I submitted to every trial you demanded," she said, voice shaking once and then steadying. "I drank your tinctures. I stood your moon vigils. I surrendered my records, my mother's ledgers, my healer marks, all of it. Name the charge plainly." Varick did not answer her question. He addressed the crowd. "For the safety of both packs, this union is revoked." Griffin lifted his untouched palm for all to see, skin uncut, oath unmade. "I reject the bond." The clearing fell silent for one beat, and in that beat Theodora understood she was being erased in real time. No duel, no inquiry, no witness circle. A sentence without process, wrapped in ritual language so no one would have to call it what it was. Cowardice. An hour after the vows shattered, the torches were still burning, but the ceremony had become a tribunal. They stripped the moon thread from her sleeves and took the silver clasp that marked her under pack protection. Varick's acolyte pressed a black ink sigil onto her cloak, a crude iron knot over a crescent moon, the mark the Iron Creed used in their sermons and pamphlets. Contaminant, warning, property pending review. She did not cry while they did it. Her throat hurt from not crying. Griffin stood 3 paces away, speaking quietly with his captains, already discussing dawn patrol routes, already moving on. When he finally faced her, it was only because witnesses expected a final pronouncement. "You should be grateful," he said, voice low enough to sound intimate, high enough to carry. "I spared you public punishment tonight." "You built public punishment," she answered. His mouth tightened. "I built order. Women like you turn packs into factions." "Women like me." "Women from your line," he corrected. "Do not force me to say more." Theodora looked at his unmarked hand again. "You were never going to cut your palm." He gave her a thin smile with no warmth in it. "Why would I bleed for a rumor wrapped in silk?" The insult landed cleanly. So did the relief beneath the pain. Whatever she had loved in him had not died tonight. It had never existed in the shape she believed. By midnight, she had been moved to a storage room behind the old armory, watched by 2 sentries who would not meet her eyes. The room smelled of oil, damp leather, and old cedar boards. Her ritual cut had reopened where one acolyte twisted her wrist during the confiscation. Blood had dried tacky along her lifeline. Her head throbbed from incense and humiliation, from standing too long under judgment flames, from the old herbal poison they had dosed her with during purity examinations over the last month. Tiny tremors skated through her forearms when she tried to sit still. She pressed her forehead to her knees and breathed. "I am not cursed. I am not unclean. I am not what they named me to keep themselves safe. I am tired, I am shaking, and I am still here. If I wait for rescue, dawn will arrive first. If I trust their mercy, I will not see another moon. Move. Move now." Footsteps approached. Not the measured pace of guards. Too many. Too quick. The door opened hard against the wall. 3 Iron Creed enforcers entered with chain loops, silver links catching lantern light. Their leader wore a red cord around his wrist, cult rank braided through with iron filings. He smiled as if greeting an old friend. "Transfer order," he said. "Pre-dawn purification." One of the sentries frowned. "No Elder Seal." "By Griffin's authority," the enforcer replied, and flashed a wax token stamped with the iron knot. Theodora rose slowly, every muscle alert. "Purification where?" The enforcer's smile widened. "Old mill cellar. You will cooperate." She knew the old mill cellar. Everyone did. No windows. Drain channels cut into stone. Used for livestock culls in hard winters when disease spread. The room tilted for half a second, then snapped back into focus. This was the breaking point. Not because danger was new, but because pretense had ended. They were not going to exile her. They were going to harvest her. She stepped backward until her calves hit a crate. "I invoke witness right," she said. "If you move me before sunrise, I am entitled to a neutral elder present." The enforcer shrugged. "You had rights before rejection." He lunged. Theodora threw the crate with both hands. It struck his knees, not enough to injure, enough to tangle. She ducked left, drove her shoulder into the second enforcer's ribs, and slipped through the gap before the chains closed. 1 sentry shouted her name. The other cursed and grabbed for her cloak, tearing the hem but not stopping her. She ran down the corridor barefoot, stone biting cold into her soles, lanterns blurring gold along the walls. Behind her came boots, then snarls as at least one shifted partially in pursuit. The keep's lower halls opened into the service court, then the smoke yard, then the postern gate used for refuse carts. She cut through the smoke yard, hurdled stacked wood, and nearly went down on spilled tallow. Her lungs burned. Her vision narrowed at the edges. At the postern, 2 young guards froze when they saw her. One recognized the black sigil on her cloak and reached for the bell rope. Theodora seized a bucket from beside the gate, flung brine into his face, and slammed her elbow into the second guard's wrist. The bell clanged once, a cracked, half-struck note. She shoved the latch bar up with trembling hands and forced the gate wide enough to squeeze through. Night air hit her like cold metal. She ran. The forest swallowed Torchlight within 30 strides. Roots caught her feet, branches whipped her cheeks, and the torn hem of her cloak snagged twice before ripping free entirely below the knee. The moon rode high, but thin cloud kept shifting across it, turning the trail into alternating strips of silver and black. Behind her, pursuit horns sounded from the keep. One long blast, then two. Hunted. She knew these woods only to the outer markers, knew where her pack traps ended and Dark Hollow patrol lanes began. Enemy territory started at the basalt ridge, where old border stones leaned like broken teeth. Wolves told stories about Dark Hollow children learning to track by scenting intruders in the rain. Wolves told stories about Darius Dark Hollow ending border raids in 6 breaths flat. Wolves told many things, and tonight all of them were safer than Griffin's mercy. By the hour before dawn, her pace had collapsed from a run to a stumbling push between trees. Her breath rasped. Poison tremors came harder now, seizing her fingers, then releasing them. She pressed one hand against the black sigil on her cloak as if she could smother it through wool. The mark felt hot, though the air was freezing. She reached the ridge as the eastern horizon paled, a thin gray seam opening behind the pines. The border stones rose ahead, carved with old runes weather had softened but not erased. On the far side lay Dark Hollow land, cedar-heavy and storm-scented, silent in the way guarded places were silent, never empty, always listening. Theodora put her bleeding palm on the nearest stone and stepped across. The stone was slick with moss beneath her palm, and the moment she crossed, the forest answered. Not with sound at first, with attention. The kind that settled across skin like cold rain before the storm broke. Theodora took 3 uneven steps into Dark Hollow land and stopped, because stopping was all she had left. Her knees shook hard enough that her teeth clicked once. Dawn had not yet lifted into full light, but the trees were no longer black silhouettes. Cedar trunks stood like pillars, wide and old, their bark stripped in places to reveal carved runes packed with silver ash. Boundary wards, active ones. The hair at the back of her neck rose. A twig snapped to her left, then to her right. She turned too quickly and the world lurched. Figures emerged between the trees without hurry. 6 wolves in dark leather and fur-lined cloaks, bows already drawn, silver-headed arrows tracking her chest and throat. Their discipline frightened her more than shouting would have. No panic, no bravado, just trained silence and kill angles. One stepped forward, tall, scar over one brow, a captain's iron clasp at his shoulder. Name and pack. Theodora opened her mouth and tasted copper. Theodora Valewood, formerly of Ironhold Treaty lands. Formerly, he repeated, measuring her. Another guard circled to her flank and caught sight of the inked sigil on her torn cloak. Captain, Iron Creed Knot. 3 bowstrings tightened in the same breath. I am not Creed, Theodora said, too fast, voice fraying. They marked me after rejection. I crossed for sanctuary under border custom. The captain's expression did not shift. Border custom applies to lawful petitioners. You arrived bleeding in enemy dark with cult branding and pursuit horns at your back. She heard it then, faint and far behind her on the ridge she had crossed. Hunting calls, distant but closing. The captain heard it too. His jaw hardened. Kneel. Hands where I can see them. Her legs nearly gave anyway, but pride held for one more heartbeat. If I kneel to unknown authority, I surrender witness rights. Here, you have no rights unless my king grants them. The words should have broken her. Instead, they clarified everything. She was one decision from chains in one territory or death in the other, and survival had become an argument she could no longer afford to lose gracefully. She sank to one knee, then both. Fingers spread on damp earth. Her vision blurred, sharpened, blurred again. Inside her mind, panic tore in circles. Stay upright. Do not faint in front of armed strangers. Say the law correctly. Say it cleanly. If your voice cracks, they hear guilt. If you reach for your side, they think weapon. Breathe in for 4, out for 4. I am not prey. I am not an offering. I am a witness asking witness. I crossed because I chose to live. I crossed because a cellar with drain channels is not purification. It is slaughter with a prayer over it. Keep your head up. Keep your eyes open. Do not let them decide what happened to you in that clearing. Do not disappear now. The captain motioned 2 sentinels forward. They approached with chain cuffs, not silver, but iron wrapped in leather. I said sanctuary, she whispered. I heard you, he said. I did not grant it. Hoofbeats thundered in from the north path before the cuffs closed around her wrists. Every guard snapped to attention. Bows lowered and then angled outward in a protective fan. Through the trees came 5 mounted riders in storm-dark cloaks, their horses breathing plumes into the thin dawn. The central rider wore no visible crown, yet authority moved with him as plainly as scent on wind. He dismounted before the horse fully settled, landing in one controlled motion that spoke of battlefield habit rather than ceremony. Darius Darkhollow was larger than rumor had prepared her for, not simply in height, but in presence, as if the space around him had learned to organize itself. Black hair, rain-touched, pulled loose at the nape. A fur collar pinned with old silver, scarred vambraces etched with runes that pulsed faintly when he moved. His face held hard lines carved by command, and beneath those lines sat a fatigue she recognized in herself, the kind born from too many nights where one wrong choice became 20 graves. He stopped a few paces away, gaze dropping to the Iron Creed sigil on her cloak. Not shock. Recognition. What did Ironhold mark on my border? His voice was low, controlled, and every sentinel went still enough to seem carved from bark and bone. The captain answered without looking away from Theodora. Petitioner claims rejection and sanctuary. Creed sign present. Pursuit horns confirmed across ridge. Darius crouched in front of her, bringing his eyes level with hers instead of forcing her to look up at him from the ground. That alone unsettled her. Most alphas used height like a weapon. Who marked you? He asked. And who ordered the hunt? She swallowed and forced the words through a raw throat. Elder Varric oversaw the tribunal. Griffin Ironhold revoked the union and sanctioned transfer for pre-dawn purification. Iron Creed enforcers came with chains. No elder seal. One of Darius's riders cursed under his breath. Another touched 2 fingers to his chest in what looked like warding against oath-breaking. Darius reached for the torn edge of her cloak and turned it just enough to inspect the sigil. Ink had bled into the wool, but beneath the knot, near the hem, was a second mark she had not noticed in the dark. A tiny brand scar, fresh and precise, the Creed's transport glyph, used for bodies tagged for ritual handling. His expression changed by a fraction. Colder. Final. By the first full spill of sunrise over the trees, he rose and said to his captain, Signal war muster at dawn bell. Send riders to Rivergate and Thornmarch. Ironhold crossed blood law. We answer by morning. The words fell through the cedar hush like an axe through dry timber. No one questioned him. 2 sentinels turned at once and ran for the outpost horn tower. Theodora stared up at him, not understanding how her private ruin had translated into military command in less than a minute. I did not ask for war, she said. You asked for sanctuary, Darius replied. They pursued you onto my stones with a cult brand on your back. That is declaration enough. Her shoulders sagged as the last thread of rigid control snapped, the ground tilted, breath hollowing out of her chest. She pitched sideways, and one of the guards stepped in to catch her. Darius moved faster, hand closing around her wrist to steady her before anyone else touched skin. Heat struck. It tore up her arm like molten wire. Not pain exactly, but intensity so pure it felt like being split open and named at once. The cedar air sharpened, storm and iron and dark rain flooding her senses until she could not tell where her breath ended and his began. Beneath his grip, a silver pulse flared under her skin, visible for one startled heartbeat, and the same light raced along the runes at his forearm, answering in kind. Darius inhaled sharply, gaze snapping to hers. Amber bled into his irises, the predator surfacing in a wave he did not hide quickly enough. His pupils narrowed, then widened. The space between them tightened like a drawn line, ancient and absolute. Around them, every dark hollow guard dropped to one knee. The force of his alpha aura rolled outward in a single violent surge, rustling needles high in the cedar crown, sending the horses sidestepping and snorting at their reins. It was recognition made palpable, authority and instinct colliding with law in full view of witnesses. Theodora's body answered before pride could intervene. A low thrum built in her chest. Awareness prickled down her spine, fierce and humiliating and almost unbearably tender. This was the same body that had been publicly discarded, same blood called corrupted, and yet under his hand every defensive wall she had carried for years began to splinter under a truth older than the tribunal fire. No, not now, not with guards watching, not after Griffin. She tried to pull her wrist free on reflex, and Darius released her immediately, fingers opening as if burned. His control returned in visible increments. He turned his head, voice cutting clean through the stunned silence. No one touches her without her consent. The kneeling line bowed deeper. Yes, my king. The command shattered the last script she expected. Possession would have been familiar. Dominance would have made sense. Instead, he had set a boundary around her that included himself, and that restraint shook her more than threat could have. For one suspended moment, they simply looked at each other, breath clouding in the same cold morning. She saw conflict in him now, layered and non-trivial. Instinct driving toward claim, discipline holding hard against it, political calculus already unfolding behind the feral edge in his gaze. He was not untouched by what had just happened. He was mastering it in real time. When he spoke again, his tone had softened without losing command. Theodora Valewood, I believe you crossed my border to live, not to manipulate my court. I also believe Iron Creed marked you for ritual use. Under Dark Hollow law, that makes you a protected witness and honored guest until formal inquiry is complete. A rider at his back shifted uneasily. My king, if this is a bond, the council will demand immediate confinement protocols. Darius did not look away from her. The council may demand what it likes. Theodora could still feel the echo of his touch burning along her wrist, silver ghostlight fading slowly beneath her skin. Terror and relief tangled until she could not separate them. Some part of her wanted to run again simply because wanting anything from an alpha had nearly gotten her killed. Another part, raw and starving, leaned toward him with a trust she had not granted in years and did not know how to stop. She hated that. She needed that. She could not name which truth frightened her more. Darius extended his hand, palm up this time, an offer instead of a grip. Will you come to the border, keep under my protection, Theodora, and give your testimony where no one can drag you into a cellar before dawn? Her throat tightened. She placed her shaking hand in his. Yes. He closed his fingers gently, helped her to her feet, and turned toward the waiting riders as the war horns of Dark Hollow began to sound through the waking trees. The horns rolled over the border woods in 3-layered calls, deep enough to vibrate through bark and bone, and Darius did not release her hand as he led her toward the northern path. His riders closed around them in a moving wall, horses stepping carefully where roots buckled the ground. Theodora walked at first because she refused to be carried like spoil, yet each stride sent a bright ache up her legs, and the tremor in her fingers kept worsening. At the first steep descent, she stumbled hard enough to twist, and Darius caught her at the waist without tightening his grip. "Ride with me," he said. It sounded like logistics, not command. She nodded once, too tired to argue, and he lifted her onto his horse with efficient care, settling her sideways so her torn cloak did not drag. He mounted behind her but kept his chest a measured distance from her back. One arm braced around her only when the trail narrowed. That restraint unnerved her almost as much as the bond flare had. The border keep rose out of the cedar fog 40 minutes later. Basalt walls fused to the ridge itself. Watchfires banked low under iron hoods. Dark hollow sentinels lined the gate approach in disciplined silence. Some stared at the black creed knot on her cloak. Others stared at the hand of their king where it rested near, but not on her spine. No one spoke until the inner portcullis clanged shut and sealed the yard behind them. Darius dismounted first, then looked up at her. "May I help you down?" The question landed like a strike against an old belief. She gave a strained nod. He lifted her by the ribs, careful of bruised places he could not have known, and set her on her feet as if she were made of glass and steel at once. A gray-haired woman in healer's green approached with 2 assistants and a satchel of tinctures. "My king, she needs immediate blood cleansing and restraint if convulsions start." Theodora's pulse spiked. "No restraints." "Then no silver," the healer said quickly. "Leather only." Darius turned to Theodora, not to the healer. "Do you consent to treatment?" Her mouth had gone dry. Bandages, water, no sedation. The healer began to object, and his voice cut across hers, quiet and absolute. "You heard her?" He escorted Theodora to a chamber above the inner hall, not a cell, but a narrow room with a hearth, a cedar bed frame, and one high window facing the pines. A writing desk had been cleared to make space for medical trays. 2 guards took post outside. Darius stopped at the threshold. "I need statements sent to 3 boarders within the hour," he said. "I will return once muster orders are signed." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. "If I sleep, do I wake in chains?" "No." "If your counsel demands it?" His expression hardened by a fraction. "Then my counsel learns the limits of its reach." He left with that and closed the door softly behind him. The healer cleaned the cut on her palm, replaced the rough packing at her wrist, and swore under her breath when she found faint needle marks along Theodora's inner arm from iron-hold purity trials. The tincture she offered for pain smelled of poppy and ash bark. Theodora refused it twice. By late morning, the shaking in her hands had spread to her shoulders. By afternoon, heat flushed along her skin in waves followed by bone-deep chills. She tried to eat broth and managed 3 swallows before nausea rolled through her. The first convulsion hit at dusk. It started as a cramp beneath her ribs, then seized down both legs so fast she bit her own tongue trying not to cry out. The bowl shattered when it fell from her hands. A guard shouted for the healer. Theodora slid from the bed to the floorboards and curled around the pain as if she could contain it by force. I am in a new room with old terror. I hear boots in the hall, and my body thinks chains. I smell herbs and smoke, and my body thinks ritual table. Stay here. Stay now. Breathe in. Hold. Breathe out. If hands pin my wrists, I will break apart. If they say calm down, I will bite through my lip just to keep from screaming. I am not in the mill cellar. I am not on Griffin's floor. I am here. Cedar walls. Iron latch. One window facing east. I choose one thing. I choose air. I choose one breath and then the next one. The door opened. She flinched hard, scrambling backward until her spine struck the bed frame. Darius entered alone. The healer appeared behind him with assistance, but he lifted one hand without turning. "Wait outside." "My king, if she aspirates or seizes again—" "I know. Wait." He crossed to her and lowered himself to the floor a cautious arm's length away, knees bent, forearms resting on them, making himself smaller in the space instead of larger. "Theodora," he said, voice steady, "look at me." Her eyes found his by effort. The room warped at the edges. "Your body is purging ritual poison," he said. "It can feel like drowning while you are still breathing. I will count with you. Nothing else happens until you say yes." Another spasm ripped through her, and she reached blindly for anything solid. Her hand closed around his forearm. The runes carved along his skin flared once under the pressure, then darkened as she gripped harder, knuckles white. He did not move away. 1, he counted. In. She dragged air in raggedly. 2. Out. They kept going. 10 breaths. 20. The trembling did not stop, but it shifted from violent jerks to shuddering waves. Sweat cooled on her neck. Her grip remained locked on him until her fingers cramped. At some point, the ceremonial torque at his throat caught the firelight, heavy silver ring engraved with the dark hollow crest. He unfastened it with his free hand, set it in her palm, and curled her fingers over the metal. "Hold this," he said. "It has my scent and my oath marks. It may anchor you." Her eyes widened. "Your council would call that reckless." "My council is not on this floor." The next tremor struck less sharply. She clutched the torque and stared at him through damp lashes. "Why are you doing this yourself?" He looked toward the door where the healer waited, then back at her. "Because if 6 strangers rush you now, your fear will feed the bond and make this worse. Because power is not proved by how quickly I can make you submit. Because I remember what it cost the last time I failed to reach someone in time." The final sentence carried a private grief he did not unpack. She felt it anyway, a hidden scar under armor. When her breathing steadied enough to form words, he asked, "May I scent your hair? It can settle the panic response." Asking should not have mattered so much. It did. She nodded. He shifted closer by inches, not touching anything else, and bent just enough to draw one controlled breath at her temple. Cedar and storm wrapped around them, the same clean note that had slammed into her at the border, now muted to something survivable. Her heartbeat eased. Only then did he call the healer in. The older woman checked pupils, pulse, and muscle tone, while Darius remained seated on the floor, forearms still in Theodora's grasp until she released it on her own. Bruised dark impressions ringed his runes where her nails had dug in. Near midnight the fever finally broke. He stood carefully, retrieved nothing from her hands, and said, "You are safe in this room. If you wake disoriented, knock twice on the headboard. My guards were instructed not to enter unless you call them." She could barely keep her eyes open. "And you?" "I will be in the war room." When she woke after first light, her bandages had been changed. A tray sat on the desk with warm broth, black bread, and sliced pear. His cloak, dry and clean, lay folded on a chair beside the hearth, not over her body, not around her shoulders, simply offered. 3 days passed before she was well enough to stand through a full strategy briefing, and by then the keep had transformed into a fortress in motion. Couriers ran stairs with sealed tubes tucked under their belts. Armorers hammered through the night. Maps of neutral ground and river crossings covered the great table in the council chamber, marked with colored stones for scouts, reserves, and decoy patrols. Theodora entered wearing plain dark wool borrowed from the quartermaster, her hair braided tight. Darius's torque returned to him at dawn with both hands and a silent look she could not quite translate. Conversation thinned as she approached the table. Darius stood at its head, shoulders squared, one palm braced near the aquifer map. To his right sat Beta Koren, narrow-faced and impatient. To his left, Matriarch Ezra from the Southern Watch, silver hair pinned with bone combs and eyes sharp as winter. 4 senior captains ringed the maps. Every one of them tracked Theodora with open calculation. Corin spoke first. We should not pretend sentiment is strategy. Iron Creed brands infiltrators with victim marks all the time. I am aware of Creed methods, Darius said. Then you know the obvious answer. Confine her in silver-lined quarters until this is done. Theodora's jaw tightened. Silver chains are for rogues and rabid wolves, not witnesses. Corin did not even look at her. Witnesses do not trigger alpha surges on first touch. A murmur moved around the table. One captain nodded reluctantly. Another avoided Darius's gaze. Theodora felt old shame rise, hot and poisonous. This room was finer than Ironhold's tribunal circle, but the logic was familiar. Redefine her as risk, then call coercion prudence. She placed both hands on the table to stop them shaking. I can identify Creed transit marks, oath roots, and false decree scripts, she said. You need that. Corin gave a thin smile. Need is relative. Darius straightened. The movement was small. The effect was not. Choose your next words with care, Beta. Corin pushed anyway. My duty is to this territory. If your bond clouds judgment, the Council can invoke emergency regency for war command. Silence detonated. Darius's pupils narrowed. Something ancient looked out through his eyes. Claws edged from his fingers with a dry, unmistakable scrape against wood as he stepped partly in front of Theodora, a living barrier between her and the table. Under blood law, he said, voice carrying to every corner of stone and timber, any wolf who threatens a protected guest under royal oath answers me in challenge circle. Name your challenge now, Corin, or kneel and retract. No one breathed. Corin's face drained of color, then flushed dark. He stared at the claws, at the king's feral gaze, and dropped to one knee with visible effort. I retract. Louder. I retract my threat to the protected guest. Darius held him there a beat longer, then let the claws recede. He did not sit. Instead, he unclasped a pendant from beneath his collar, a black iron disc etched with the Royal Guard sigil and ringed in old silver. The room recognized it immediately. 2 captains swore under their breath. He turned to Theodora and placed the pendant in her hand. This is my personal guard command mark, he said. Until I revoke it, every sentinel in Dark Hollow answers your operational directives when they concern your safety, witness movement, or Iron Creed intelligence transfer. In my absence, your voice carries my authority in those lanes. Matriarch Isra rose halfway from her chair. My king, that is politically costly. Yes. Then why do it in front of every captain? His gaze stayed on Theodora. Because private kindness does not stop public cowardice. The power dynamic shifted so abruptly it felt physical, like pressure changing before lightning. Captains who had ignored her now met her eyes and bowed their heads by degrees, some out of respect, some out of necessity. Corin remained kneeling until Darius dismissed him with a curt gesture. Theodora stared at the pendant in her palm. It was heavier than it looked, warmed by his skin, edges worn where his thumb had rubbed over years of use. She understood the gamble he had just made. If she failed, his enemies would call him compromised. If she succeeded, the old architecture that had cast women like her as disposable would fracture in full view. Darius lowered his voice for her alone. Can you work with me now? Not behind me? The question opened a space she had not believed existed. She closed her fingers around the iron disc and lifted her chin. Yes, but I will disagree when you are wrong. A faint, tired curve touched his mouth, the nearest thing to humor she had seen from him. Then we begin well. For the first time since the altar fire, she let herself stand without bracing for the next blow, and when the council bent over the maps again, she stepped into the circle instead of waiting at its edge. A courier slammed through the council doors so fast he nearly lost his footing on the stone, rain on his shoulders and a leather dispatch tube clutched to his chest with both hands. Southwatch intercept, he managed, breathless. Taken off a Creed runner at Bracken Cut. He burned 2 pages. Not all. Darius broke the wax with his thumb and scanned the first sheet. The muscle in his jaw locked. Read it, Matriarch Ezra said. He handed the page to Theodora instead. The script looked like Dark Hollow command hand at a glance, but the spacing was wrong, too clean, as if copied by someone who understood letters and not the rhythm of urgency. She read aloud anyway, each line dropping colder than the last. By order of Alpha King Darius Darkhollow, bonded pairs are to be separated at night watch for purity audit. Any refusal constitutes oath breach. Reinforcement lanes to Rivergate suspended until blood review is complete. A captain swore softly. Corin went still, then reached for a second page. That seal is ours. It is shaped like yours, Theodora said, taking it back. The wax blend is not. Dark Hollow uses cedar ash in winter. This has iron filings. She looked up. Griffin's scribes do that so seals survive heat. Darius's gaze sharpened. How certain? She tapped a line near the footer where an ornamental flourish curled too far left. This loop appears in every Creed sermon copy I saw at Ironhold. Their chief scribe broke his wrist as a boy. He overcompensates on downstrokes. Ezra leaned over the map, expression hard with focused anger. So he forges royal decrees, isolates bonded wolves, and blocks reinforcement lanes. To what end? Theodora unrolled the half-burned page from the courier tube. Most of the top had blackened, but 5 words remained intact in the middle where folded parchment had protected them. Stone throat, blood moon, final key. Her stomach dropped. The old aquifer, she said, under neutral ground. Silence settled, this time stunned rather than submissive. Corin frowned. That site is sealed. Sealed to ordinary entry, Theodora replied. Not to bloodline keys. My family kept vow language for the original wards. Griffin knows that. He spent months collecting our archives through tribunal seizures. Darius's attention did not leave her face. Say the whole thing, Theodora. She swallowed once. The Iron Creed doctrine is not just purity politics. It is structural control. Griffin teaches that mate bonds divide male command, that Luna lines destabilize inheritance, that pack magic should pass through obedience oaths sworn to one war leader. If he opens the aquifer during Blood Moon and uses my blood at the Central Basin, he can force a cascade through old water wards. One night of disrupted mind links for bonded pairs across all 3 territories. Not permanent, but long enough. Long enough for what? Ezra asked, though she already knew. For targeted killings, Theodora said. Unbonded heirs, dissenting elders, women marked as future Lunas. Anyone protected by pair links that night will be blind to each other by moonrise. A primary dread moved through the chamber then, not theatrical panic but professional fear. These were commanders. They understood what one night of severed coordination could do to a nation of wolves. Darius looked to the courier. Outcome from Rivergate and Thornmarch? Rivergate replied at dawn, the courier said. Their alpha denied our call, claimed our first summons contradicted itself. Said he received both reinforcement and stand-down orders under your seal. Thornmarch sent 12 riders and requested proof of authenticity from all future dispatches. Griffin already poisoned comms, Corin muttered. Theodora set the pages flat on the table with deliberate care. He wanted border skirmishes to look organic. If every alpha thinks his neighbor moved first, no one reinforces neutral ground in time. By the time they realize the deception, he has the aquifer and a ritual frame ready. Darius's hand flattened over the map where neutral territory narrowed between river and basalt shelf. How long to Blood Moon apex? Isra answered. 6 nights. Then he begins staging tonight, Theodora said. He will need anchor circles, oath posts, and transport lanes for bound prisoners. He will also need witnesses. Creed power runs on performance as much as magic. He always makes terror public. Darius straightened and gave orders in clipped sequence, each one precise enough to move men before fear spread. Dual seal protocol on every dispatch, voice countersigns by runestone for all border commands. Pair captains by old feud lines, so no forged decree isolates one faction alone. Corin, you verify every messenger against scent registry. Isra, I want neutral ground ingress maps from pre-war archives. Theodora comes with me. No one argued this time. They moved. By the second night after the forged letters surfaced, Dark Hollow had become a machine running on too little sleep and too much urgency. Signal fires burned on 3 ridges. Scribes worked in shifts under armed watch. Every order left the keep with wax rune and spoken code. Still, the damage Griffin had seeded kept blooming in new places. A patrol from Thornmarch arrived with 1 rider missing and 2 contradictory summons stitched into the same satchel. Rivergate sent a formal protest accusing Dark Hollow of mobilizing under false truce. Another border elder demanded proof Theodora was not the architect of the hoax herself. She read each accusation and kept working. At dusk, she stood with Darius over a sand table in the war room, moving carved markers through the aquifer tunnels she remembered from childhood stories and confiscated diagrams. The room smelled of oil lamps, wet wool, and the metallic edge of anticipation. His shoulder brushed hers once as he reached for a marker, and heat pulsed beneath her skin so abruptly she had to grip the table to hide it. He noticed anyway. He always noticed. Too close? He asked quietly. Theodora shook her head, then corrected herself because honesty had become a discipline between them. Not too close. Just difficult. A faint softness crossed his expression, gone almost immediately beneath command focus. We can place distance and still win this. Distance is not the only problem. Her gaze dropped to the carved stone basin at the map center. If he needs my blood, hiding me solves one threat and guarantees another. He will keep escalating until I am either delivered or dead. Darius rested both palms on the table and studied her with that same layered attention that had unsettled her at the border. You are not a lure. You are a strategist with unique access. And a target. And mine to protect, he said, then exhaled as if weighing the word choice. Under law first. Under bond, if you allow it. The resulting tension was almost unbearable in its restraint. She wanted to lean into him and wanted to step back and wanted, with equal force, never again to be defined by what a powerful man wanted from her. Her thoughts rose fast and unsteady, and she let them come because suppression had stopped serving her. I am standing in a war room with a king whose touch steadies my pulse and threatens my judgment in the same breath. I want the warmth of him, the terrible calm of his attention, and I do not trust wanting anything this much. Want has been a lever others used. Want has been how I was led to an altar and stripped in public. Yet this is different in all the ways that matter, and none of the ways that feel safe. He asks, he waits, he does not take. I keep waiting for the hidden price, and it does not arrive. Maybe that is the wound, not the cure. Maybe healing is this, standing in fear and choosing anyway, one measured consent at a time, while the world burns and still expecting tenderness to survive the fire. She drew a steadying breath. Then hear my strategy, Alpha King. We make his obsession cost him. He inclined his head. Speak. Before she could, a horn sounded from the outer yard. One blast, pause, too short. Incoming report under threat. Captain Ivan entered, mud to his knees. Creed cells struck 3 oath shrines at once. No fatalities. They didn't hold ground, They carved the same line into every stone. "What line?" Darius asked. Ivan handed over a charcoal rubbing. Theodora recognized the phrase immediately and felt cold gather at the base of her spine. "Love is the weak hinge. Break the hinge, own the gate." Griffin's private catechism, used only with inner circle officers. He was no longer hiding scope, he was recruiting through spectacle. Darius folded the rubbing once. That was not vandalism, that was declaration. "It was timing," Theodora said. "He wants us defending symbols while he moves bodies." Pressure mounted by the hour. Corin obeyed every order now but carried his resentment like a visible scar. Some sentinels took directives from Theodora instantly when she wore the command pendant. A few hesitated just long enough to be noticed, then corrected themselves when Darius's captains stared them down. Every small pause cost minutes they did not have. On the fourth night after Isra's 6-night warning, 2 nights still remaining before blood moon apex, rain came hard enough to blur torchlight along the walls. Dispatch runners tracked mud through corridors. Theodora was in the archive annex with Isra, cross-referencing aquifer seals, when a gate bell rang in emergency sequence. Not attack. Petitioners at night in dangerous weather. A guard captain's voice carried from below. 6 civilians from Hollowmere claiming Creed pursuit. 2 injured, requesting immediate shelter under sanctuary law. Isra frowned. Hollowmere is 2 days east. In dry weather? Theodora said. Not in this rain. They descended to the lower hall. The 6 figures waiting beyond the inner grate wore soaked travel cloaks, heads bowed, wrists held out to show no weapons. One woman cradled her arm in a blood-stained sling. A gray-bearded man swayed as if half-conscious. Their fear scent was strong, but layered under it sat another note, faint and wrong, like ritual ash dampened in oil. Theodora's instincts sharpened to a point. "Open only the first gate," she told the watch sergeant, touching the command pendant at her throat. "No one crosses second threshold until verification." The sergeant hesitated one fraction too long, then obeyed. Iron teeth groaned. The first gate lifted. The gray-bearded petitioner raised his head. His eyes were too clear for a man collapsing from blood loss. "Sanctuary," he rasped, "by old border right." Theodora stepped closer but stayed behind the ward line. "Then speak the petitioner clause." A beat passed. Rain hammered the courtyard stones. The man smiled. The injured woman threw off her sling and hurled a clay ampule through the half-open grate. It shattered on the floor, releasing silver-laced smoke that hissed where it touched the ward line. 2 more ampules followed from beneath cloaks as hidden blades flashed in the gate light. "Infiltrators!" the sergeant roared. The hall exploded into motion. Guards slammed spears through the grate gaps, driving 2 attackers back into the rain. One infiltrator vaulted the side rail, hit the inner latch, and took an arrow through the shoulder from the gallery above, but kept moving with frightening focus. Another slammed a rune spike into the stone beside the gate chain. Sparks burst, and the inner ward stuttered, dimming from blue to dull gray. They were not here to hold the keep. They were here to break one lock and take one body. "Theodora, down!" Isra shouted. She dropped behind a pillar as silver smoke crawled along the floor in low ribbons. The infiltrator with the arrow wound lunged through the failing ward and grabbed for her cloak. She drove the iron edge of the command pendant into his wrist, twisted, and felt his grip break. A guard tackled him from the side. Steel rang against steel. Someone screamed for medics. Another screamed that the east ward had gone dark. The gray-bearded decoy, pinned at the outer gate with a spear at his throat, laughed through blood in his mouth from a split lip. "Too late," he said to no one and everyone. "He's at the stone throat already." Darius entered at a run from the rain-black yard, flanked by 4 of his personal guard, fury and focus cutting through chaos like a blade. He took in the smoke, the broken ward, Theodora on her feet with blood on her sleeve that was not all hers, and the infiltrators still fighting capture. Status, he snapped. Diversion strike, Theodora said, breath ragged. Aquifer move is live. A horn wailed from the western tower then, long and continuous, the signal reserved for catastrophic breach beyond borderlines. Captain Ivan's voice thundered down the stairwell above them, stripped of all ceremony. Neutral ground has fallen. Creed banners at the Aquifer Ridge. Multiple packs engaged each other under forged truce break orders. We have less than 2 hours to pre-apex moonrise on the seizure window. Blood moon apex is still 2 nights out. The keep seemed to tilt around her as every thread converged at once, and Theodora understood with perfect, brutal clarity that Griffin had just forced the war onto his chosen altar. Darius turned to the nearest captain with rain still running off his hair and armor. Seal the keep. Interrogate the living infiltrators. Corin takes command of interior defense. His gaze cut to Theodora. You ride with my flank unit. Corin stared, then nodded once, anger swallowed by urgency. You will have the west gate open in 60 heartbeats. Theodora wiped the smoke sting from her eyes and forced her breathing steady. Not flank, spear point. If Griffin is at the stone throat, he is waiting for me. Darius's jaw tightened. That is why you stay in my line. That is why I cannot. She held up the command pendant, its iron edge now smeared with someone else's blood. He built this around my bloodline key. If I do not reach that basin before he does, we lose bonded wolves across 3 territories in 1 night. For a fraction of a second she thought he would refuse and physically remove her from the decision. Instead he stepped in close enough that only she heard him over the alarms. I will not trade your life for strategic elegance. And I will not hide while he turns every mate bond into a weapon. Her voice broke once and then sharpened. Give me 6 fighters who follow orders fast. Give me clear lanes. Let me finish what he started with my name. The tension between king and witness, bond and command, held long enough to hurt. Then Darius gave one hard nod. You lead the decoy ingress to the upper shelf. I lead the breach through the east cut and keep pressure off your lane. You do not disappear from my sight without signal. She met his stare. If the gate opens, I disappear anyway. His expression went feral for one flash, then locked down. Then come back breathing. By the time they rode out, the rain had thinned to cold needles. Torches along the western road blurred in wind as Dark Hollow's vanguard moved at full pace, wolves and riders threading through cedar and basalt toward neutral ground. 2 Thornmarch outriders met them at Split Creek, mud to their thighs, and shouted confirmation that Rivergate had finally broken silence and was moving to contain border skirmishes, once proof of forged decrees reached their alpha by runestone. Theodora felt a sharp, grim relief. External lines were no longer blind. Griffin would not get an empty altar. They crested the Aquifer Ridge at the edge of moonrise haze and saw the battlefield. Neutral ground had become a ring of fractured command. 3 pack standards snapped in crosswinds while lines that should have held apart collided in bursts of confused violence and abrupt retreats. Creed banners marked with the iron knot rose behind them on the upper shelf above the stone throat, where old spillways cut into the hill like ribs. Fire baskets burned green with alchemical salts. At the center, the aquifer mouth glowed faintly from runes forced awake too early. Griffin had staged it exactly as she feared. Spectacle first, slaughter next. Signal horns, Darius ordered. Tri-pack cease pattern now. Dark Hollow trumpets answered with the old neutral code, 3 descending notes no war leader could mistake. Thornmarch echoed. A beat later, Rivergate horns joined from the south line. Confused fighters pulled back by instinct and training, creating jagged pockets of space where Creed cells suddenly stood exposed as the only force still pressing forward. Move! Darius roared. His flank slammed into the western Creed ranks. Theodora ran with her six-fighter unit toward the upper shelf, sliding on wet stone, ducking thrown knives and short silver bolts that hissed when they struck rock. Captain Ivan stayed at her left shoulder. Two sentinels with tower shields kept a narrow corridor around her body. She hated the protection and needed it. At the first stair cut, a Creed zealot dropped from the ledge above and swung a chain weighted with silver hooks. The chain caught Theodora's forearm and tore cloth, burning through skin with a sharp white pain. Ivan took the zealot off his feet with a shoulder hit and pinned him to the step while another sentinel disarmed him with a boot and blade. No lingering, no pause. They climbed. Halfway to the throat, a blast charge detonated at the lower wall, showering them with grit. The blast did not collapse the stair. It drove a sheet of runoff water across the steps, turning basalt into glass. Theodora slipped, went down hard on one knee, and nearly slid backward into open air before a sentinel grabbed the back of her tunic and hauled her upright. Pain flared up her leg. She kept moving. At the shelf entrance, two rune posts pulsed red. Gate primers. Griffin had already keyed Phase 1. "We can destroy the posts," Ivan shouted. "No," Theodora said. "If you shatter them now, the surge dumps into the basin uncontrolled. We need them intact for reversal." A spear grazed her shoulder as she ducked into the throat corridor. Stone walls narrowed around her, wet and cold, carved with old vow script half buried under fresh Creed paint. The chants grew louder. Male voices, synchronized by oath marks, rising and falling around one central rhythm that made her teeth ache. She reached the ritual chamber and stopped. The aquifer vault opened into a circular hall cut directly into bedrock. Knee-deep water swirling around a raised altar basin etched with concentric runes. Creed officers ring the basin with hands linked by iron cords. Bound wolves knelt at the perimeter as hostages and witnesses, adult fighters from different packs, alive and shaking. Griffin stood at the far side in black ceremonial leather, cloak discarded, right hand raised over the basin where blood already threaded the grooves in dark lines. He smiled when he saw her. "There you are," he called across the water. "I began to think your king would keep you caged." Darius's unit crashed into the chamber mouth behind her, steel striking stone, but Griffin lifted two fingers and silver-laced nets dropped from the ceiling arches between Darius and the basin, not enough to stop an army, enough to cost seconds. Seconds were the whole ritual. Theodora did not wait for permission. She splashed forward through the water toward the central platform. "Take her alive!" Griffin shouted. Two Creed guards lunged from either side. She drove her elbow into the first man's jaw, pivoted, and slammed the guard pendant into the second man's throat hard enough to break his breath and balance. Ivan intercepted a third attacker. Darius tore one net anchor free with bare hands and barked orders to cut lanes, but Theodora was already at the basin lip. "This is the choice," she told herself. "Not after rescue, not after debate. Now." She drew the knife from her boot, sliced her palm across the old scar line, and let blood fall into the center channel. The runes flared gold, then lurched toward Creed red. Griffin's grin widened. "Yes, give it what it wants." She spoke before the color settled, voice ringing against stone in the forbidden vow language her mother had taught her once, and sworn her never to use unless law itself was in danger. The syllables tasted like iron and moon water, older than pack politics, older than Griffin's doctrine. She reversed the sequence marker by marker, naming origin before obedience, witness before command, protection before blood. The basin shuddered. The red line snapped backward like cords cut under tension. Light raced out through the iron cords linking Griffin's officers, then turned on their oath marks, branding each seal with its own coercive script. Around the chamber, Creed fighters staggered, clutching at their chests and temples as their coordinated mind link collapsed mid-command. Chant rhythm broke into ragged, unpaired voices. Outside the chamber mouth, the battle shifted instantly. Creed ranks that had moved like one body began colliding with themselves, orders misfiring, units splintering. Thornmarch and Rivergate captains seized the opening and drove wedges through the disordered lines. Griffin's face changed from triumph to fury so quickly it was almost childish. "You ungrateful little—" He surged across the altar and seized Theodora by the throat, shoving her back against the carved stone. Her wounded hand slipped on the wet rim. He raised a silver blade with his free hand, point angled toward her ribs. "Prophecy women exist to be bled for order," he hissed. The chamber narrowed to breath and pressure. Then training and rage aligned. She drove her elbow straight into his sternum. His grip loosened. She trapped his knife wrist against the altar edge with both hands, shifted her weight, and forced him down until his shoulder hit stone. Water surged around their boots. The blade shook inches from her side, then stopped as she locked her forearm under his. "You taught them fear," she said, voice raw and carrying. "I choose witness." She looked past him and shouted, "All surviving wolves to the basin! Bloodlaw judgment! Open circle!" The command pendant at her throat flashed as if answering. Darius heard and acted. He did not lunge to finish Griffin. He turned, held the chamber mouth with 4 guards, and roared the same order into the corridor until captains from 3 packs pushed inward and formed a ring around the altar, weapons lowered enough to signal lawful sentence, high enough to stop interference. Griffin spat rainwater and blood from a split lip, still straining under her hold. "You think they will follow you now? Power belongs to men who take." Theodora shifted her pinned grip, slammed his wrist flat to the rune channel, and reached with her bleeding hand for the sluice lever set into the basin wall. Old iron, stiff. She pulled with everything left in her shoulders. The lever broke free. Sanctified moon water, stored behind the upper gate for cleansing rites, thundered through the opened sluice and flooded the altar in a white surge that drowned the active runes. Light exploded up Griffin's arm where his oath mark sat. The brand seared bright, then black, then went dead. His body arched with a strangled cry that echoed off stone, more shock than wound, and the wolf presence behind his eyes vanished as abruptly as a snuffed torch. When he collapsed, it was with human weight only. Theodora stood over him, shaking, water streaming from her clothes and hair, and answered his final claim without raising her voice. "Power endures with those who protect." The last active runes guttered out around the basin. In the silence that followed, the only sounds were hard breathing, dripping water, and distant horns outside shifting from battle calls to recall. Darius crossed the flooded platform at last, stopped 1 step away, and looked at Griffin's inert form, then at her. "Judgment witnessed by Tripack captains," he said formally, "sentence completed under blood law." Around the ring, one by one, captains bowed their heads in acknowledgement. No one called her cursed. No one looked away. Theodora released the knife from her cramped fingers and let it fall into the moon water at her feet. The knife rang once against submerged stone and vanished beneath the churn of moon water. Theodora's knees nearly followed it. Darius caught her elbow, not to pull her into him, only to keep her upright while captains closed the judgment circle and medics moved for the bound wolves. "Witness statements before anyone leaves this chamber," Matriarch Isra ordered, voice carrying over the water. "Rune scribe, record every name." Captain Even waded to the altar with a split lip and a grin that looked half disbelief. He lifted the snapped sluice lever, the silver blade from Griffin's hand, and one of the iron oath cords, then set them on a dry ledge for inventory. "Physical proof secured," he said hoarsely. "No one touches until Tripack seal." Corin arrived minutes later with Dark Hollow reserves, saw Theodora standing over Griffin's body, and gave her a long, unreadable look that might once have turned into argument. It did not. He dropped to one knee in water and bowed his head. "I challenge the wrong threat," he said. Command error acknowledged before witnesses. Theodora stared at him, chest still heaving. Stand, Corin. Keep that apology for the tribunal and give me your efficiency now. He stood at once and started relaying containment orders as if he had served under her for years. By full moonrise, 3 Tripack scribes had copied testimonies. The forged decrees from Brackencut were sealed in waxed oilskin. The half-burned aquifer page and charcoal rubbing were logged as corroborating evidence, and the captured infiltrators from Dark Hollow's gate were transferred under guard for open trial. Rivergate's envoy arrived drenched and grim, confirming their delayed reinforcement had been caused by the counterfeit stand-down order and formally retracting their accusation against Darius. Only when every item was listed, stamped, and witnessed did Theodora realize her hand still clenched the command pendant hard enough to leave an imprint in her palm. Darius noticed. "Keep it tonight," he said quietly. "You earned the right long before I named it." They climbed from the aquifer through a shattered stairwell into cold, clean air. The battlefield had gone quiet except for stretcher calls and the low instructions of healers moving among the living. No triumph songs, just exhaustion and relief braided together. At the ridgeline, where the old stone circle stood under moonlight, torches had been lit in a wide ring. Theodora stopped when she recognized the place. This was where rejected brides had once been paraded and judged under borrowed language of purity, where women stood alone while men discussed their worth over their heads. Tonight, the ring was full of witnesses from all 3 packs, and every gaze was on her by invitation, not condemnation. Darius came to stand before her, armor scored, runes dimmed to ember lines along his forearms. His voice did not rise, yet it reached the full circle. "Theodora Valewood, Blood Law recognizes your judgment at the aquifer and your command authority in active war. Bond law remains unsealed by my choice until and unless you ask." The distinction steadied her more than any touch could have. She drew one breath, then another, and stepped onto the center stone. "I ask now," she said. "On my terms, in witness." A ripple moved through the ring. Not shock, something closer to reverence. Darius inclined his head. "Name your terms." "You do not take what I do not offer. Ever." Her voice shook once and held. "We govern as partners, not shadow and throne. You do not bite first because law expects it. You bite because I say yes." His gaze went fierce and bright with emotion held on a disciplined leash. "Yes." She reached up and loosened the collar of her torn tunic, baring the shoulder-neck seam where pulse beat quick and hard. Then she nodded. He moved slowly enough that she could stop him at any breath. One hand settled at her waist, warm and steady, the other braced behind her neck. His lips touched her skin first. A pause. A question. She tipped her head farther in answer. His bite came controlled and precise. Pain flared sharp as winter light, then deepened into a rushing heat that spread through her chest and down both arms. She gripped his shoulder to ride it, not fight it. Gold-threaded energy spilled from the mark point in branching lines beneath her skin, bright for one suspended heartbeat, then softer, settling into rhythm with her pulse. Her knees weakened, not from fear, from the force of recognition finding permanent shape. Darius released at once and pressed his forehead to hers, breathing hard. "Mine," he whispered, the word roughened by restraint, more vow than claim. "Only if you choose it." Theodora touched the fresh mark, winced, and smiled through it. "Yours," she whispered back, "because I choose it." Around them, the stone circle seemed to exhale. She slid her hand to his jaw and guided him down enough for her mouth to reach the same seam at his neck. His throat worked once. Then he went still and offered himself without flinching. When she bit, she understood in her bones why the old songs had called this a circuit, not a chain. Pain sparked under her teeth, then turned luminous, pouring silver white through him in a clean surge that ignited over his pulse and raced along his rune marks. His hand tightened at her waist, never restraining, only anchoring. Something vast opened between them. Not noise, not compulsion. A clear two-way current of feeling and intent. Fear, and the way he held it without hiding. Grief, old and unnamed, placed in her hands without defense. Fierce protective devotion that did not erase her agency, her own stubborn hope, finally admitted. Her hunger for belonging, no longer a thing to be punished. The bond locked with a low internal click. She felt more than heard, as if two torn edges had finally found matching grain. Mate, he said against her temple, voice unsteady for the first time since she had known him. Mate, she answered. They stayed there, foreheads touching, arms around each other, while the marks cooled from burning brightness to a steady living glow. Theodora could feel his heartbeat as distinctly as her own. Not overwhelming, simply present, like a second drumline keeping time beside hers. When they lifted their heads, Darius turned to the witnesses and spoke with ceremonial clarity. Chosen, not taken. Theodora faced the same circle, shoulders squared, blood and rain and moonlight on her skin. Seen, not silenced. They repeated it once more together, words carrying over stone and torch smoke, like a new law written aloud. By the third week of harvest moon, the Tripac Hall at Rivergate was so crowded that sentinels lined the windowsills as well as the aisles. No one could claim secrecy in what followed. The infiltrators who attacked Dark Hollow's gate testified under oath cleansing that Griffin's inner circle had issued forged decrees, staged false petitions, and prepared transport glyphs for ritual prisoners. The Iron Creed enforcer marked by the red command cord was identified among those captives by 2 gate sentries and Captain Ivan's inventory log. He was convicted in the same session for coordinated abduction and ritual conspiracy, then sentenced to chained labor exile beyond Pack borders under Tri-Pack seal. Surviving Iron Creed officers were tried in open court by a mixed panel chaired by Isra, with Rivergate and Thornmarch elders countersigning each sentence. Coerced followers who surrendered early were granted amnesty after cleansing rites and binding service terms. Officers who planned killings were stripped of rank and exiled under guard to labor settlements beyond Pack borders. Elder Varric was brought in chains from Ironhold archives with seizure records still bearing his seal. He tried to stop mid-testimony, offering half-truths and pauses that once intimidated younger scribes. This time, every pause was read back into record until he answered fully. The loaded hesitations finally paid what they owed. He admitted the tribunal had been engineered, the purity line scripted, the transfer order for pre-dawn purification approved without lawful elder quorum. When sentence was pronounced, no one looked away. At dusk that same day, Theodora stood on the Dark Hollow dais as Isra placed the high Luna circlet in her hands, not on her head yet. Name the office before you take the medal, the matriarch said. Theodora looked across the hall at rejected wolves, disputed blood children standing with guardians, unmated women from hostile packs wrapped in borrowed cloaks, and captains who had once questioned whether she should be chained. I accept the office of High Luna and Keeper of the Border Sanctuary, she said. Sanctuary law will hold for any lawful petitioner fleeing coercion, regardless of bloodline rumor. Blood law decrees now require 2 signatures. War authority remains with the Alpha King. Lineage and sanctuary authority rests with me. Neither domain nullifies the other. Darius stepped beside her and signed first. She signed second. The hall answered with a single unified strike of fist to chest. That night, long after the hall emptied, she sat at a broad cedar table in the sanctuary house with ledgers open under lamplight. Darius sat opposite, sleeves rolled, reviewing intake names while she annotated housing assignments and oath-cleansing schedules. The command pendant lay between them beside his torque, both now official regalia entered into the new record as shared symbols of office. Near the hearth, Two pack pups who had arrived with Rivergate petitioners slept in a tangled heap under one blanket, bellies round with supper, utterly unafraid. Theodora reached across the ledger margin. Darius met her hand halfway, fingers lacing through hers over ink, wax, and law. Once, she had crossed a border believing enemy woods were the only place left to die with dignity. Now she looked at their joined hands above the sanctuary rolls and understood she had not crossed into an ending. She had crossed into a kingdom where belonging was no longer granted by fear, but built, witnessed, and kept.